Hi everybody, my name is Tim, and today we're going to be talking primarily about Fluid Flux 3 and how you can take a simulation domain and blend it seamlessly with a coastline domain. The use case we're going to be looking at specifically is the same as an Ambience video that I made recently, where there's kind of this small creek flowing down in this mountain area, and then it goes down into a bay, which is basically a little lake in the mountains, and it seamlessly goes from the creek to that coastline domain in a really nice way. So that's the primary thing we're going to look at today. And then after that, we're going to take a quick look at two plugins that I use to make this scene kind of come to life. Both of them are made by a gentleman named William Foucher, or Fauché. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, but they are Easy Snow and Easy Fog. And they, I feel like, made this come to life about as much as Fluid Flux 3 as well. So we're going to jump in right now talking first about Fluid Flux 3 and how to blend these two domains together. All right, this is our scene. I'm just going to really quickly walk through what we have here. I basically built this scene so that you could look at it from almost any direction and get some nice stuff in the background. Of course, there's going to be more focus on the foreground elements and getting more detail in like the actual bay area, but want to make sure that there is something in the background to look at as well. So looking here, if you've seen my other videos on how I use Fluid Flux 3, this might look familiar, where I use the water body river tools that are built into Unreal Engine to do some terraforming to make this little creek bed for the simulation to run down. So that's what this spline is. This is a water body river that I've used to create this indentation. And then I used the foliage tool to place these rocks around, do some dressing around. That's how I place the trees. There are some meshes here that are kind of placed by hand because I wanted them in specific spots. But in general, it was the foliage tool to place pretty much everything. And then just use the landscape tools to create this big basin area, kind of irregularly shaped, some little peninsulas and stuff coming out. So that is our scene. So now that we know kind of how it's set up, we're going to look at exactly how to set up Fluid Flux 3 to work here. So the very first thing we're going to do is go over to our content browser, navigate to, actually this is the wrong folder, content Fluid Flux. I recommend, I've said this before, I recommend using colors to label folders that you go to frequently because it's just easier to find. Fluid Flux. And then also using the filters here to narrow down, because there's a lot of assets in some of these packs. Being able to just say, show me the blueprints, or show me static meshes, that can be very helpful. So we're going to start off, by the way, everything we're using in Fluid Flux, other than a data asset that we'll create later, is going to be a blueprint. So might as well use that filter. So the first thing we're going to do is search for a coastline domain. And just type in the word coastline and we get what we need. So right here is the coastline domain. We're going to drop that in here. It's going to think for a minute. And there we go. We now have our pretty massive coastline domain. Now, the domains in Fluid Flux basically work like this. They are an area where a certain thing will be calculated and done in that area. So for a coastline domain, within that domain is where it will try to figure out where there should be waves interacting with meshes or a landscape, to go up on shore. And so you only need it to be as big as the area you need the coastline to be. So for this is way too big of a coastline domain. So we're going to start off by going over here to the right side, and we're going to go to the area resolution. This is basically like just the resolution, the DPI of this, how many pixels kind of there are, how many squares. So we're going to take this and actually cut it in half to 256, 256. And then the second thing we're going to do, just to shrink it a little bit more, is take the world pixel size right here. So this has 256 by 256 pixels. We're going to make the size of the pixels smaller. Go from 500 to 300. And now we can take this and we have something that is much more similar to the size of our area. And we're going to put that in an area that will fully cover the area that we want our waves and stuff to show up. So that looks pretty good for now. The next thing we need to do is we're going to take the coastline surface, the Flux surface coastline, which you can see right here. Another quick tip. The way that this works is the domains gather all the data for how a simulation will interact with things in the environment, but then the surface elements tell it how to actually look, the color of it, the size of the waves, the speed of the waves, things like that. So these work together to make the whole thing work. So we can see the Flux surface coastline right here, and we're going to drag that in. Now, I don't know if this functions the exact same way as a domain, but just to be safe, what I've been doing is take this box right here. So this is basically the Flux surface like area. And there's a section over here for domain size. If I take this and increase this from 1,000 to 3,000, for example, you'll see that get bigger. Again, I don't know if it's important to make this cover the whole area, but I have been doing that. So I'm going to do that right now. And I know the number is 76,800 by 7,600, and then 10,000. All right, so that should cover everything once I move it over a little bit. Come on, put it over here. All right, so we got that, big enough on the XY axis. It should be big enough also on the Z. We're actually going to take this and move it up a bit. And again, I don't know for sure if this matters, but we're going to do it. There we go. So the next step is to come over here. We don't have to come over here, but I'm going to. We're going to add what's called an ocean wave actor. Come on. BP Flux ocean wave. So this thing, I'm going to put it in here. It's going to look kind of funny. Okay. So we have this grid of basically waves. And this is another element that's needed to show how big the waves are and how the waves will appear. So this thing, I don't remember if it will matter if it's actually in the scene, but I've always just been taking it and moving it off to the side because it's just going to be something that's referenced by the surface actor. Okay, so we're going to come over here. I'm going to save all, just because it's good to save. We need to kind of link all these things together now. You're going to go to the coastline domain, and you look here for surface actor reference. That's the thing we added right here, surface coastline. So we're going to click here, Flux surface coastline. Okay, so now it knows this is how I should look by referencing that. We're going to go to the Flux surface coastline, and that needs to know what's my reference for waves. So we're going to go to the ocean wave actor and select the thing that we just put in there, Flux ocean wave. That's great. And now you can kind of see already that we have a kind of a coastline. It's really weird because the the bottom of this is just kind of screwy looking, but you can see the waves being generated and it's interacting with the shore and stuff. So now we need to make a couple corrections here. The first thing is you might think that, okay, the water is really low. I just need to bring the coastline domain up and then that'll fix it. So if I do that, I'm bringing it up and it didn't bring up the height of the water. Nothing changed. So let's undo that real quick. What you need to do is under coastline domain, go to water surface height. And I'm going to start dragging this up. And you can see the water level rising. Isn't that cool? I happen to know that the number I need is something like 2021. All right, so we've got our water at about the right height that we need it, but I want to show you something interesting. I'm going to click G so I get into game mode. If I go in here and look at the shore, we don't have any realistic looking waves here. We just have like ocean waves going up and intersecting the land. And if I go under the land, for example, you can see the water just continues. There's no interaction happening, even though the water's at the correct height. Why is that happening? Well, I will tell you. Let's hit G again so we can modify this. Again, the domain determines where interactions happen. So even though the water height is at the right spot, the domain isn't high enough. If I go down, you can see the top of the domain doesn't intersect with the landscape. So what I need to do is take this and move it up to a point where I know that it's going to intersect the landscape. And now you can see everything changes. And now we have waves. Granted, these are big waves like you might see on an ocean, and the waves are still really big like an ocean, but it is interacting with the shore like it should. Now what we're going to do is we are going to go and put in some parameters to make this look a little bit more like the Ambience video did that I made. So I'm going to do that really quick and I'll come right back. All right, I've input all of the main settings that I would need to change in order for this water to look pretty similar to how I had it before in the Ambience video. So now we can move forward with addressing a few other things. One thing that I want to talk about is this FluxHide tag, and also the visibility options for sensing foliage meshes. Right in this area, the capture visibility, the use foliage meshes checkbox is false by default. If you leave this false, then any foliage meshes you place, like big rocks and stuff, are not going to be taken into account when it's deciding where the waves should go. If you turn this on, then the foliage meshes will have waves taking them into account when they come in and crash against the shore and whatever. They can also then crash into the foliage meshes. Now the other thing is this FluxHide tag. That is important if you want it to not crash into things. Like right now, this rock, for example, has waves coming into it in a weird way. Like they're coming from the shore even and then crashing into this item. So if I click on this, I go tag, there's no tags on it right now. But if I go to tags and I add one, and I type FluxHide, hit enter, and then let's get rid of that. Let's go back up to the coastline domain and then hit rebuild all. Now, this rock is not going to be taken into account for that. And other things near the shore, maybe that's fine for them to be taken into account because they're right by shore. But things like this, in order to avoid weird looking wave generation, you can use that tag to hide things from its visibility. Another thing that affects how detailed this looks and therefore how nice it looks is if you go into the Flux surface coastline and you scroll down to the mesh. And these are some controls for basically how fine of detail it can have. So I recommend leaving this on Infinite Grid Niagara, but then changing the plane to a higher resolution if you can handle it. So we click this, and now all of these waves will have way more detail as they come into shore than they would before at just 64. So another thing to think about, if you find that you're not getting as much resolution as you would like, you can adjust that setting to get some more detail out of it. So now we should be ready to set up the simulation domain, the simulation modifier actor, and get all this blending really nicely. So for that, we're going to go back over to the fluid flux thing, simulation, and we are looking for, here I'm going to kind of zoom out here so I know where to place it a little bit better. And again, I'm going to save all. We are looking for flux simulation domain right here. I'm going to take this and drop it in. And we're going to go right away over to the domain right here. And we're going to change the area resolution because this is not big enough to cover the whole area we want to simulate in. And again, if you haven't watched one of my other videos about this, if you want to be able to kind of bake the simulation state, either the initial state or just have it be what it is, you need to make the resolution not only square, but a power of 2. Okay? It can't be like 500 by 500. It should be 512 by 512 or 1024 by 1024. So that's what we're going to do here. 1024 by 1024. And we are going to place this so that it covers the area we want to simulate in. And again, it doesn't matter. We don't need to cover the land because we're not trying to simulate this land over here. We do need to cover this land. But we're going to start off right about here. Actually, I need this to be back a little bit further because this little basin that I made is where basically the water source is going to fill up, and that's where the water is going to pour out. So I need that to be back far enough to cover that. Cool. Now, just like with the coastline domain, we want to have this interact with our foliage meshes because that's where a lot of the pretty interaction happens. It's the river crashing into all these rocks and not just the landscape on the outside. So same kind of thing. We're going to go down. Where is it? Visibility. Right here. You can also do the FluxHide thing here, but we want to turn on use foliage meshes. And if you look at the screen, all those things now you can see are being taken into account. So we have that in place. We want to make sure that our entire area is green, which means that it is going to be taken into account for simulation. Let's go up here. This looks all green. Cool. And then let's see. Is our simulation domain going to cover far enough back? Let's move this back a little bit. Yeah, that looks great. Okay, so now we need to add our source modifier actor, which is Flux modifier source actor right here. So we drop that in. This is where the water comes from. If you've seen my other videos, this will look familiar. Take this, we should be able to move it back a little bit. We might need to adjust this a little bit. But what we're going to do is go in here. In case you didn't know this, for the duration, if I was to go to simulation domain, I'm going to save. This isn't like unstable, I just always like to save. If I hit start simulation, this water is just going to drop the water you see here, and that's going to be it. Bloop, that's it. So obviously we want to have more water. So we need to go to the Flux modifier source actor, click on this component here, and then change the duration to any number other or lower than 0. So I just use -1. And now when we run this, it will just kind of run continuously. So we got the duration set. This will run continually. Let's go over to the simulation domain and hit start simulation. And we can see the water just kind of gushes out there, filled up that basin, and now it starts to run down. I'm going to hit G to get rid of all this other stuff. And you can see that it is interacting with the rocks. It's flowing down really nicely. It's not going very fast, but that might be just fine. What we're going to do, one little tip to help you save a bunch of time, is in the simulation domain, if you go to the simulation preview frame rate, by default it's 120. You can set this lower, and this basically just controls how fast the simulation runs. It doesn't actually change the velocity of the simulation. It's not like it actually makes the water run faster and splash everywhere. It just makes the simulation get done faster. So this maxes out at 1000 FPS. And when you change a parameter like that, it resets the simulation. That's fine. We're going to start simulation now, and this is going to go fast. So it's making its way down. This is great. And it goes into the water here. I'm actually going to hit G so you can see this. So you can kind of see how the water kind of flowed over there, started to fill up some of this space. We could let it run for a little while and it might eventually fill up the space, but I'm going to stop it right now and show you something. So I'm going to go like this, stop simulation. I'm going to hit G again so you can kind of see this. You can see that the coastline is still not blending with it. We have the waves going where there's a river coming down, and the river should be taking precedence over this and like pushing those waves out of the way. So what we're going to do real quick is go to content browser. I made this folder called My Flux tutorial, and we're going to create a data asset so we can save this simulation data. I'm going to go down to miscellaneous, select this data asset, not this one, the one that looks like a little pie chart, and select PDA. And you get, these are things that come with Fluid Flux. Flux simulation state. Select that and name it. There we go. We're going to save all. And now what we can do is go to Flux simulation domain, right click, export there. We're going to select the one we just made. And if you didn't make your simulation domain square and a power of 2, you would not be able to save that. You would get an error or it just wouldn't do anything. So if you want to be able to do that, that's why you have to make it follow those parameters. So now we have this thing saved. What I'm going to do is go to initial state in my simulation domain, and now I can select that thing we just made. And now if I hit reset simulation, it doesn't do anything because now it's basically going to start the simulation from this point. Okay. All right, now I'm going to show you something. This is where a lot of times I got confused and it took me a while to figure this out. But if we go to simulation domain, which we're at right now, surface actor reference. This is what you need to select in order to make the coastline and the simulation blend. Go here, select Flux surface coastline, and you'll see everything changed. And now it looks incorrect because the coastline is gone. So you see this? The water's flowing down, and this is showing us where the water actually flowed. And like I said, it could technically eventually fill up this little area here. But this is the coastline, and it's like kind of trying to blend, but it's this hard line. So it didn't work at all. And we need to do a couple things to make this actually blend properly. If we make sure that we're on the Flux simulation domain and scroll down, this is the first thing that we need to do to enable the blending. We see area world blend, and basically this is the axes X, Y, negative, and positive, and we can add kind of a blending buffer on all those different parameters. So what we're going to do, I just happen to know for this scene, we have 0.2, 0.2, 0.1, and 0.1. And now you can already see that this is trying to blend from the river to the coastline. Before, there was no buffer there. That's why it was just that hard line. And that's why it didn't work. But you see still, we have an issue where the river runs down here and then basically like goes up this hill of water to meet up with the coastline. And the reason for that is because the simulation domain for the river as it is now is down low, okay? In order for this to blend properly, we need to have the simulation domain bottom be basically right at the same level as the coastline. So what we're going to do is go up to the top here on the simulation domain. We're going to clear this, okay? We don't want that anymore. If I was to take this and drag this up, it's got to think a little bit. You see how the coastline domain comes back up because it's trying to blend the heights of the two different domains. If I bring this up even more, come on, there we go. You can see that the coastline domain is rising up to try to meet that over the distance specified here. By the way, if I back up a little bit, you can actually visually see what that blending domain space looks like. This is kind of this lighter orange, and this is a deep, stronger orange. This is basically the blending space here. This is a position you might need to play with a little bit yourself and just see what looks the best, because when the simulation runs down here, this orange stuff right here, it's orange because it's not on the ground. It's not intersecting the ground, and so it kind of shows like an error, but that's basically where the water will flow. That's the floor of the simulation. So you want that to be right just under where the coastline domain is, and you can see right around here the coastline domain is higher because we're blending up to that. You can see that it's higher. It'll make sense in a second. So now with this new positioning, if I go to the simulation domain, hit start simulation, and it's nice because we have our 1000 FPS preview frame rate. This will run way faster than it would in real time. Water's running down. I'm going to hit G so we can see this a little bit better. I'm going to hit stop simulation just so we can see this because it's probably pretty well simulated. There you go. So now you can see, I'm going to do a little bit more. So you see back in that corner over there, right in here, the simulation is flowing across that floor, and it's going to eventually fill up that whole space over there. So we can let it do that. We don't have to. Actually, I might as well because I want to show you something really cool or interesting. All right, I think that'll be good enough. Stop simulation. If we come over here, now you can see the water is flowing. We have a decent transition to the coastline. We do still have some fairly strong lines here. This might actually be kind of realistic, but it might be stronger than we want. But what's interesting is we don't have any waves lapping up against the shore anymore. Go over here, no waves lapping against the shore. This is basically just where the water has pooled from the river. And I feel like over here, especially like on the other side of that rock, there would still be lake waves coming up on shore. If we come over here a little bit further, basically just outside of the simulation domain, we get waves back. And that's because where the simulation domain is taking precedence, we don't have any of these coastline waves until it blends into the coastline domain. So this presents an interesting art direction ability, where what we can do, let's take this and actually let's reset simulation. If we, let me hit G again real quick. So you see how I have the simulation domain pretty far out into the coastline. If I take this, remember this is the blending space right here, okay? And this is like pure simulation domain. If I back this up until we basically just have blending, it's going to try to combine and go smoothly from simulation domain to coastline. So now this is basically just blending space here. So now if I come over here, let's save all. And we start simulation. It's running really slow right now. But you can see, even with that little change, how it's just the blending space, it's not just pure simulation state or whatever, the domain. We get a really nice blend from the river down to the coastline domain. So now I feel like it's filled up the whole space. We can hit stop simulation so it's not bogging down so much. But if we come down here now, we have the river coming down, and then not that far over, we still have waves coming up. Do you see that? We got little waves coming up like that. And if we come over here, we still have waves coming up on shore. And I feel like that's way more realistic, and down here they're stronger. Way more realistic than having the river simulation be way the heck out there. This is nice because I feel like the river would be influencing this bay this much, and then as it goes out, we run into normal waves, and those eventually get kind of overpowered by the river simulation. So that's the basics of how to set this thing up and how to get it to blend. And I would say that the main ways to blend like the color and everything of the river with the coastline is to just adjust the height of the simulation domain. The deeper it is, the more that they'll blend together, and I can actually show you that really quick. Let's stop, reset simulation. Hit G again. Let's take this and just drop the simulation domain down a bit. Okay, let's try that. We'll save real quick. Start simulation again. And we stop the simulation. So if you look here, if you remember what it looked like before, when the simulation domain was higher, we had more defined lines from where the water was flowing in, and like that silt and stuff ran down. But now that we moved it down a little bit, we actually get much more of a blend where there's still like the silt and the light water coming in, but the lines aren't as defined. And these, by the way, these like brighter ripples on the water here, you can adjust those in the material settings. I'm not going to do it right now, but that's why these little flashes of light are coming. It's just because the material settings aren't set up for this right now. But you can see how this blended really nicely. Let me hit G. And so this is like the basics of how I set this all up. And so, you know, you can run the simulation with different settings, different gravity and dampening and velocity settings and stuff. But you can see like this looks pretty dang good in here. So I feel like this is a pretty great start. And so it's just fine tuning from here. So if you're trying to blend the simulation domain with the coastline, that is basically how you do it. All right, so now that we've talked about how fluid flux can be used to blend these two domains, I want to talk to you really quickly about easy snow and easy fog. These, again, were amazing ways to add detail to the scene and kind of realism in ways that I wouldn't have known how to do on my own. If we come in here and look at the landscape, you can see if you've ever worked with landscape layers, it's pretty easy to add snow and other elements and blend them, you know, blend between. Like we have kind of this trampled snow being blended with like a windswept snow and other things. But to get a snow covering on meshes, I'm like, I have no idea how to do that. But luckily, Mr. William Foucher, or Fauché, I need to find out how to pronounce that, made this plugin, and it was crucial to this. So I'm just going to show you. First of all, he has way better tutorials on his own page talking about how to use these. So I would highly recommend you go watch his tutorials for these plugins. But what was great is you basically just add a material function to the master material for the meshes, and it allows you basically per mesh to decide how much snow coverage it gets. There's like a worldwide snow amount, snow coverage and wind and all that, but you can actually override it per mesh. So you can have some meshes that have more or less snow than others. Like maybe you want to have, for example, I use the same plugin on this tent and this crate and other things to add the snow to it. And so maybe I didn't want the same kind of snow or same amount on this tent as I do on the rocks. You also have the ability to do vertex painting. And so I took this this like campfire fire pit model, and I was like, if there was actually a fire in there, there might be still snow on the outside, but for sure not where there's fire. And so I was able to go in and vertex paint and say, okay, no snow on this inner part. And so then there was no snow. And it just felt way more realistic. So it's an incredible plugin that also, by the way, did not just have snow on the meshes, but if I turn this on, you have falling snow. And you can do a lot of other cool things, like you can have it be like a blizzard, and you can have wind, like, I don't know what you call it, like drifting snow, where it's like blustery clouds of snow blowing around, all this cool stuff. And what's great is you can also tell it to be camera centric, for example. So in this scene, just to keep things light because there's fluid flux and other things running, you can have it just spawn snow within a certain radius and only around the camera. And so that's what I did. I had it just spawn around the camera. So it spawns like in world space, but relative to the camera. So that helped a ton. I'm going to turn that off just so it's easier to see this. But the other thing that I used also from William is the Easy Fog plugin. You can see back here some of these things appearing just to add some very lightweight kind of volumetrics. And these are just fog cards. If I was to click on one of these things, like here, you can see that this is just a two-dimensional plane. It does have some movement elements. And as I move around, it becomes kind of more obvious that it's two-dimensional, but especially when you're like low and moving slowly and you're hiding it behind trees or up in the mountains, it's actually very believable, very lightweight, and easy to use. So I highly recommend those two plugins in addition to Fluid Flux to add some realism. They're also not that expensive. I don't remember how much they are, and they go on sale sometimes, but it's like 15 bucks each. So it's amazing. So that's pretty much all I have for you for this tutorial. In my mind, it's those big, medium, and small things that really make a difference in trying to sell realism for scenes like this. And being able to blend the simulation domain and the coastline domain in a way that looks so seamless and real, and also just the detail and the ambiance that those two plugins from William Foucher add, I think those are incredible. So I encourage you to check them all out and go make some cool stuff.